Hey everyone, I hope you're all doing well today. This time we're going to be talking about ECW Hardcore Revolution on the PS1. So this is a reskin of either WWF Attitude or WWF Warzone. That being said, there's no real story mode to it. You just have this very tedious career mode that you have to go through, and you're left kind of using your own imagination as to why, what is going on, what is happening, why does it matter. That's all up to you. If you win a match against an opponent, then you can move on to another one. You start off at house shows, and then you work your way up to pay-per-views. It is exactly what you did in WWF Attitude. So if you liked that game, you'll probably like this one. If you liked ECW, you might not really like this very much because it's not really an ECW game. It's just WWF's version of ECW. So think of the late 2000s ECW, and that's basically what you're going to be playing here. If you like WWF Attitude or WWF Warzone, then you're going to like this game. If you hated opening a menu to see the possible moves that you could do, then you're probably really going to hate this one because that's basically what you're going to be doing. I think that style is fine. It didn't, bother me too much because after a match or two, I kind of figured out what the moves were and I didn't have to keep going back to the menu. But I would still rather be playing SmackDown than this. It does have a decent number of game modes, which is pretty awesome. You can add stipulations to the matches. It's great that all of this stuff is in here, and it's mainly carried over from the game that this is a reskin of. There is a bit of a learning curve with these games, just because you need to keep opening up that menu to figure out what you can and can't do. And it does feel a little bit awkward doing it. Depending on the difficulty that you've chosen, it can feel kind of impossible right away, but that can be said about any video game. This menu system is more of a problem in retrospect. At the time, I don't remember thinking it was a big issue. However, once I started playing SmackDown, I was like, wow, I really don't want to go back to those other games. As someone who kind of likes the gameplay for WWF Attitude and Warzone, I did like this one's gameplay quite a bit. However, if you were a fan of ECW's television product, you probably aren't going to like this too much because you can't really recreate an ECW match in a video game, or at least not in this video game. As I mentioned earlier, this feels an awful lot like when WWF brought ECW back. It's just sort of, it's cool that you can play as your favorite ECW wrestler, but you're not really doing that. There is blood in the game, I'll talk more about that with the graphics, but it's kind of weird, and I don't really know if it actually adds much to the game or not. The game looks fine for the time that it was released. This is going to mean that it's not going to look that great by today's standards because it just can't, but I don't really think that's a huge problem. If you're going into a game from, the late 90s, early 2000s, you should really know what you're going to get. The blood thing is kind of weird. It's just sort of there on the characters when they do start bleeding, but I don't really think they could have done it any different. It's just sort of strange. It doesn't really impact the game at all, but it's a little weird. This game was released in 2000, and it was basically made, essentially, in 98 or 99, depending on when they decided to do all the visuals over again and sort of throw a coat of paint on it for ECW. Well, I think it's weird looking at it now because it is kind of a weird game to look at. The ropes don't really move all that well. The ring is fine. The audience looks pretty good. it's just going to be strange to look at a game from this era and then compare it to something today. It's just going to be very weird. I will say the crowd looks really great when I compared it to some of the other PS1 games that I played. They're not going to blow anyone away, but it looks really good. Like, the crowd is actually excited and they give a shit about being there. It's really cool to see that. The wrestlers' entrances are really good. I love the way that they're done in this. They were really good in Attitude and also in Warzone, and here they look excellent, especially when I go back and I compare it to like WCW Mayhem, which was released around this time, and their weird urine fountain fireworks. There's no better way to really describe it. Those entrances in WCW Mayhem are pretty terrible. The ones here are really good. I think the visual presentation along with the gameplay is where you can really tell that this is just an ECW game in name only. You're not really going outside. You're not, throwing tables at each other. There's really very minimal hardcore stuff that's going on. It's just not really an ECW game. It's just a WWF game that says ECW on it. It's kind of disappointing from that standpoint, but if you look at it as just a pure wrestling game, it's fine for a late 90s wrestling game. I couldn't really rate this any differently than WWF Attitude. It has the exact same problems and the same strengths as that game. The controls are a little wonky, the move lists are kind of strange when you go back and replay this, but overall, it's a pretty decent game with decent graphics, decent controls, and a lot of game modes to play. The blood looks weird. There's a very tedious career mode, and it lacks any real story, but you could say that about a whole bunch of wrestling video games. If I had played this game when it came out, I really wouldn't have had anything bad to say about it at the time. I would not have really known anything because I hadn't watched the ECW show. Getting too many three-letter words here. I really hadn't watched ECW when it came out, and it's only through retrospectives that I've been able to really experience it. However, after watching those, I don't think that this game would have been something that ECW fans really would have wanted, because it doesn't really reflect the product at all. It is a good wrestling game for the PS1 era with the same weirdness that's in WWF Attitude and Warzone. It can be fun, but it's just not what ECW fans probably would have wanted. And I would really rather be playing the SmackDown games.